Today we have Yalila Espinoza, who's coming up next, who's going to talk on the light and shadow of sexuality and shamanism. Yalila Espinoza is a spiritual health practitioner who integrates art, music, dreaming, movement, ancestral rituals, and sacred plant teachers into dynamic, embodied explorations. She received a PhD in consciousness and transformation and spiritual counseling training at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. Her studies focused on indigenous shamanistic practices, sexual and reproductive health, and dreaming. For the last 10 years, she's been engaged in academic studies, Amazonian shamanism using plant teachers, and many other trainings, such as the ISIS wheel, ISIS approach with Gina Ogden, have nurtured her own spiritual erotic awakening. All of these transformative experiences have inspired her forthcoming book titled In the Belly of the Serpent, Sensual Wholeness with Plant Consciousness, focused on how the purification and guidance of plant teachers are vital for sexual, spiritual health and liberation. So obviously this is an important topic. Yalila brings both her sensual and sexual and part, but also extraordinarily professional, research-based and serious-minded. So with that, such a nice perfect combination, I'll turn you over to Yalila.
First, I'd like to ground in here, and if everyone can close your eyes and take a deep breath in your belly and send energy down. And if you can imagine yourself at a time when you have communed with a sacred plant ally, whichever one it is, just remembering the feeling wherever you were, and breathing that in and giving thanks. I give thanks to ayahuasca and the other sacred plants for the teachings, reminding me what is already inside me, that I am the universe. I also thank the teachers in the human form that have shared with me and many of us here in this room. Okay. So I invite you to listen with your whole body when I'm speaking, and remembering how you're hosting these plants inside you. And this is a story of magic, of black, gray, and white magic. I believe in magic. Does anyone here also believe in magic? Yeah. So there's 4 chapters to this tale. Who am I? What did I discover? Why is this important? And how to take action to guide our future in the present moment. All right, in the belly of the serpent, who am I? I was working at BC Women's Hospital in Canada, and I was on a team of professionals with women who had problematic substance use. Most of them had sexual trauma. Some were sex trade workers. They had mental health challenges, and they were also pregnant. So I'd sit on this team, and I would be in long meetings discussing treatment plans, and half the time, these beautiful, heart-centered professionals with good intentions would say, we really don't know. Let's just experiment with different combinations of drugs. So after a few years of this, I thought, there's something missing. I would like to explore, how can I be in service to these women who have had sexual trauma and are pregnant, needing reproductive health support? So then I ventured to San Francisco, literally just following a dream. I saw the Golden Gate Bridge, and I said, I guess I go to San Francisco, and found out that there were schools there. And so I thought, oh, this is perfect. Life's easy. I'm just going to be in the city and read some books and talk to some cool people. But it wasn't exactly as I had planned. I realized that I needed my own healing journey. And it was actually the sudden death of my partner that inspired me to go to Peru. I myself needed a big wake-up call, and it was this death of such a dear person to me. So I went down there expecting to, you know, cry for days and be devastated kind of thing. And it's interesting that that's not what happened. It was like ayahuasca knew that I needed love, to remember what love is in myself. And I just had hours of beautiful sensations, hours and hours of gorgeous colors and visions. And many of you may have experienced this. Who's experienced this? An ayahuasca ceremony? Yeah. So I was like, what is going on? This doesn't make sense. So that was sort of sparked my interest with this plant teacher. And so I went down to Iquitos in the middle of the PhD program, and I asked specifically for a research question. I wanted to know, what was I here for? What made sense in terms of me to focus on? And so I was dieting certain plants, and that means drinking some liquid every day in isolation in the jungle. So I didn't speak to anyone for 3 months. They served me food when they remembered. And so I asked the plants the first night in ceremony, and I said, what would you like me to focus on? And I had this vision, and who's heard the Coca-Cola dream? Okay, so good. And it's perfect that I'm here in New York, because in the dream, in the vision, I was in Times Square in a platform with a Coca-Cola banner, and I was having sex with my partner at the time, and thousands of people were watching. So I had this vision, and I was like, no way, I am not exploring this area. That's like, I'm shy. So, you know, I kept having these visions of like monkeys having sex. Everyone in the jungle was having sex, all the animals and the trees and it was so erotic. And I said, okay, fine, I surrender, I will follow. Oh, and this is just an example of some of the visions that I had. This being came in, it looks very much like this, with a male counterpart, and was having sex with my partner and I. This was the fun that I thought I would just explore, but there is a shadow side as well, which I'll talk about later. So, second chapter, what did I discover? I followed a heuristic research methodology and interviewed women around North America that had considered experienced ayahuasca drinkers, so at least 30 ayahuasca ceremonies, and had been in at least one plant diet for 3 months. Does everyone here know what vegetalismo is? Vegetalismo, Amazonian tradition where shamans, healers use plant teachers, plant allies for their healing techniques that involve physical, emotional, spiritual healing. Who knows what a plant diet is? Okay. So, a vegetalismo practice where someone is drinking plants, depends on which one the ayahuasquero wants you to diet. And many of them are not hallucinogenic, so it could be Ayhuasca, ayahuasca is known for healing reproductive imbalances. And so you drink this plant every day, and traditionally, it's in isolation. The ayahuasquero, one of the ayahuasqueros that I worked with, created a social diet where people could diet in their home centers, living their regular lives, going to work, raising children, etc. And often people go down to South America and diet plants. And some go down for cancer, and they're on an extended diet for 3 months. Some go down for emotional depression, and they'll be on a certain diet for whatever time they need to be there. If you're apprenticing, then you would enter into a year-long diet, and it's rigorous, very strict intake of food, and no sexual activity for the whole time that you're dieting. So, from the interviews that I gathered, I found that the themes were in 4 categories: the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And I'm going to use a case study, and I'll call her Maya, just to run through all these categories. So Maya is a 42-year young woman with 3 children. She's a nurse practitioner. And she had, in the physical realm, she had an ovarian cyst and had irregular menstrual cycles, bleeding 6 months at a time. And so she was introduced to ayahuasca through her brother and went down to Peru and entered into a 3-month diet with Ayhuasca. And so what she found was, after maybe it was 3 months in Peru, and then she continued the diet without drinking the plant, but continued the food restrictions, etc. And basically the idea is that you are tuning into the plant teachings so that you can hear information. You're given insight about, maybe you have a question: why do I have an ovarian cyst? Like, where did this come from? Also, just simply drinking these plants, it's a deep purification, so lots of vomiting sometimes, and various ways of purifying. And so after 6 months, she found that the ovarian cyst was gone, that her menstrual cycles were regular, and this was only the physical realm. And I have to say that I'm always told to clarify that this study was not one to prove a cure. This was a study to explore women's experiences, and this is what Maya shared. In the emotional realm, she had been heavily involved with sexual activity, like just chaotic, was having sex with many different partners, married, not married, women, men, and her life was scattered, and she realized that she was addicted to sex and was wanting to go into deeper layers of what that meant, and realized that she had had sexual abuse in her childhood, and that her mother had as well, and she was seeing visions that her grandmother did as well. So this was a generational issue that she was holding in her body and needed to purify. And when she did that, she was able to look at her behavioral patterns, how she was making choices. She mentioned that she was living in this world where she had layers of trauma as a 5-year young, as 10 years. And so by drinking and purifying, it was clearing these layers of trauma one by one. And she also mentioned that Ayhuasca is beautiful in terms of purifying in many ways, and that morosa, another plant that she dieted afterwards for 3 months, was beautiful for her heart healing, and that she actually felt compassion for herself and for the person who had sexually assaulted her. And then in the spiritual realm, she mentioned, once she committed to Ayhuasca, that this plant spirit asked her to be her lover, basically. So you've heard, who's heard of the spirit marriages in some of the shamanistic texts? And so this is basically what happened, was this plant spirit became her ally and was with her all the time. And really, what she found was that when she wasn't engaged in sexual activity during the plant diet, that she was able to fully embrace this energy of the plant, and that this plant almost expected it as well. So sometimes you hear this jealousy that healers and curanderos go through with, and that it's not to be taken lightly. It can really skew things up, and this is just my perspective and from what I gathered from these women, that it is real and it happens. So she went from depression, sexual addiction, reproductive imbalances, wondering how to take care of her children, all these things. She felt like she didn't have enough space for her kids emotionally, etc. And after she actually drank in, more than 50 ceremonies, and was dieting almost a year off and on, and she found that her life dramatically changed in the 4 areas that I mentioned. Now, she also experienced going down to Peru with her 16-year young daughter and having the shaman there touch her daughter inappropriately during the ceremony. And of course, Maya freaked out. And all this anger came up, and she was talking to all the women there and educating them about what could happen, and really feeling protective, obviously, of her daughter, and went through a really challenging process of cutting off all the vegetalismo practices that she had learned, and the beautiful connection that she had because of this one ayahuasquero that she trusted. And here's one quote from her. "I think that shaman facilitators who abuse their power sexually during ceremonies are taking vital energy from women. There are all these people going to them who are really clear with lots of vital energy, and they mistake the medicine for the person pouring the medicine. When you're in a position of power, there's really no such thing as consenting adults." And then she also mentioned the vital importance of power and accountability, and she says, "With the power comes responsibility, and that's where accountability comes in. The more power you have, the more humble you need to be. The scariest part is that shamans are not accountable to anyone because they have reached a point where they're so strong in their power. It's sad that women have to be so careful about where they go for healing. We can be wounded in the same area that we need healing." When I mentioned at the beginning that this is a tale of power, this is what I've learned with ayahuasca. Yes, there's amazing potential for physical purification, mental clarification, communing and having unions with other entities and other realms, communing with your body, yourself, becoming embodied spiritually. And this is, in my opinion, a path of power. And when you think about sensuality and that erotic energy as the portal into power, then this starts to make sense for some people. So what does this highlight? Because I've had a lot of people come at me, I mean, not come at me, but come to me. Somehow I was magnetizing all these people telling me their stories, both in North America and South America, and they didn't even know who I was. And so I took a step back and I said, well, what is this highlighting for all of us? In North America in particular, what are the consequences of sexual trauma in our culture? There are so many layers here that are expressed in the media, in our families, in our personal relationships. And what are our sexual initiations? What have we lost? How are we sexually initiated in puberty? When we first commune with another human being, what are we taught from our families, our parents, our first role models? So for me, the issue with shamans, us as Westerners projecting this power onto another person, a shaman, a curandero, and saying they know something that I don't know, that is dangerous. And what is it telling us when that shaman abuses the power sexually? What is that saying to us as Westerners who believe that we can go into another culture and pay money and expect exactly what we want in a certain form? So there's a little bit of entitlement there, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I firmly believe that sexual indiscretions and abuse of power in ceremony is not acceptable, it's not ethical, and that's why I'm traveling around speaking to people and gathering stories about that, and how as a community can we take action. And I also encourage everyone to look at their own inner prostitute archetype. What are we willing to exchange for power? Why are we seeking to going to these other places and communing with these plant allies, these plant teachers? What are we exactly wanting? And just to be really clear about our intentions. So shifting gears a little. Why is this important? Our sacred future, and I do believe that our future is right now, and it's in our bodies. So the heart being the portal to the integrated consciousness that we're longing for. And I believe that ayahuasca, and other people have written about this, that it is, this plant teacher is on the fifth dimension, and the heart is the portal to the fifth dimension, and this is where collectively we are heading towards as an evolution. So remembering that the universe is within us, and that the plant intelligence is showing us in what ways the universe is inside us. So this is an embodied wisdom through layers of purification and revitalization of our sacred erotic energy that can then be channeled into areas that we want to change our communities and our world. So I believe that this opening into our sexual liberation allows for this vital energy to be directed in balance, in a harmonious ways, where the feminine and the masculine energies are dancing together in a beautiful way. So practical wise, what do we do to move forward in the future? And many people have contacted me saying, what do I do? This is terrible and people are suffering. So information. I know a lot of you know how to gather and research information. So it's the basics. It's like checking out the healers, checking out the medicine centers, talking to your friends, your community, reaching out. There's a lot of amazing websites that have information listed. And also being really clear again about your intention. What are your boundaries? Being aware of the cultural differences. And also I encourage people to follow their intuition, that hands-on healing in ceremony is not actually necessary, by the way. And that you trust your body knows best when something feels off. And this is not only in ceremony, everywhere. I'm saying that our bodies are so intelligent, and if we follow this intuition and this knowing, that we will have more clarity in life. Integration, so focusing on community, like these events. Thank you everyone for organizing and volunteering here. This is essential that we come together, because I feel like sometimes we become ceremony centric and we think that this is where all the learning is, but actually it's only a tiny portion of our healing and transformation, that it's what happens outside. And so this leads to inspiration, like what exactly are we inspired to do in our lives and take action, not only in connecting with sacred plants, but in our communities, in gardening, or whatever projects that we come together to be involved in. And so for me, what am I inspired to do with this? And the idea of an entheogen school in the Bay Area. I'm collaborating with a few people there, and we want to create a place where there's 4 pillars of the integration, the education, and the research, and also the permaculture. And so it's an alliance, basically. It's gathering information and support. It's educating in various ways, so really getting out there. So this is lovely to speak with you, kind folks, and I feel like we're on the same vibe, and I really want to get out there to other communities and share stories. And also, I want to bring in more ritual, so ritual for everything. So before I come on stage, I have a ritual outside, thanking New York and the people here and the land here. How do we integrate and be grateful and be connected to everything around us? And that includes also the idea of dieting local plants, local trees, local tobacco, sage, whatever is in your garden, like that way of connecting to the energies around you right here. And in this school, looking at opportunities, how do we interweave different healing modalities? So it's really exciting for me to be in ceremonies where we're practicing Qigong and Reiki, and a lot of my friends are acupuncturists and herbalists, and we're coming together and just really being creative about how we can involve community and different forms of experimentation and learning. And then it's funny because you can see maybe it's the A-E-I-O-U. I was playing with words and someone in the audience said, oh, it's united. That's your you, Yalila. And so community exploration, how are we coming together and uniting? Because this is really where it's all about. Like in ceremony, I'm sure you've had the experience where you realize that we're all one and we're all each other. Has anyone experienced that? Yeah, and that's, for me, really what it's about. And how do we navigate? Like, this is the beauty and the mystery and magic of being in a human form, is how do we then navigate that in our lives with all these other humans, and then also learning how to navigate relationships with all these other than human beings that are around us all the time. So it's like, in some ways, I see ceremony or this kind of school as teaching us how to be in relation with another, like going to a counselor. If you're trying to figure out how to be with your partner, this is like how to be with the world. Oh, and if anyone is interested in speaking further about this issue, collaborating, please contact me, add your email to the list that will be passed around. And I just really appreciate your hearts and creativity and all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yalila. That was beautiful. We have 10 minutes for open discussion. Anybody have something to say? Oh, I want to remind you, like I did yesterday, that a question rather than a personal statement. So a question is an interrogative, usually ends with your voice going up like that. Like that comes from Jim Fadiman. I have to give credit where credit is due. So with that in mind. Stand up, please.
I wonder if you could give any information about spirit marriages from the traditions that you know. Can you speak to that?
Spirit marriages, like what is it like? What's the sex like? Or what's the... Just...
in some cosmologies, there are these relationships between human beings and marriages with beings in the astral. Mm-hmm. I don't know much about the Peruvian tradition, so that's why I'm asking. I don't know if you've come across that at all, or if that's an appropriate question.
Yes, okay, so, and that reminds me of a really good point in terms of the sexual unions that, in the positive side, could be a spirit marriage, where this plant ally is showing you how to heal, and actually a plant doctor, infusing the human with the energy to heal in ceremony, and there also are many instances where these sexual entities that can come in ceremony, where it's actually not in the best interest of the human and can skew your energy. And in the literature, I believe it's Amarengo's 91 and Luna's book, Ayahuasca, what's it called? Visions, Ayahuasca Visions, that they talk about the mermaid and the vision of the mermaid and the dolphins, and how they're actually sexual entities seducing humans and sucking them into the water and then impregnating the person as a way of reproducing themselves. And so that's not considered a good energy for humans to take in. So it's a very mysterious kind of realm, and not to be taken lightly. Again, like when we're taking in these plants, and the deeper you go into learning about it, that, I mean, it's really serious which entities that you are connecting with and in what capacity. So the spirit marriage is considered for the people who are curanderos, and they've committed their life to healing, and that plant is committed themselves to this healer, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So they're both helping each other out.
Another question. Sir.
Hi. I was curious about the sort of issue of the shamans and the women and all that. I'm Peruvian myself, and I've traveled a bit to the Amazon. And one of the things I think is also just in the interface of culture, I kind of wonder if what the expectation is when so many Westerners go to the Amazon essentially to pay money to fuck children cheap. I mean, William S. Burroughs was doing it in the 50s. And so what the expectation of Western sexuality is and how they treat women, and then that sense of entitlement where you go down and you're a white woman or a Western woman, and all of a sudden it's this thing that's too valuable to share with some Indian person. And yet when, maybe some of the same people go into the, not that I'm judging, but maybe some of the people same go to the ceremony, they get back to their hotel and they, 2 women for $5 for the week. And so they know this is their women, and then our women, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so what do you see about that? Like, what do you think about that in terms of, the interface of culture and what, say, they see from the majority of maybe Westerners versus this sort of our group that goes down and maybe tries to do something different?
Good question. So I have spoken with ayahuasqueros very bluntly, and many of my friends have as well, apprentices, and very clearly said that, like, this is not appropriate, it's unethical to be having these sexual relations when the women say they're consenting, but they're really not. And the ayahuasqueros are saying, what are you talking about? What's the big deal? These women throw themselves at us. They're, I'm not saying all. They said some of these women throw themselves at us because they want something from us, and we're happy to oblige. Because these ayahuasqueros have their own sexual trauma, and one in particular that I know well was sexually assaulted as a child himself. And so it just perpetuating this trauma, and they're not in the cultural framework or have a support system where they can actually even be inspired or supported to heal and then to unravel all of those pieces. So it's just women go down, and it's easy, they're an easy target, and a high percentage of the women that, could be men too, but I've only spoken to women, that they have had sexual trauma in the past, and so there's some energetic dynamic that's going on, and some women say that they were shocked, in ceremony when they felt this hand on their, breasts or whatever, and that they weren't sure whether this was part of the healing. And so because they didn't, they weren't educated, they didn't know their own boundaries, and so it was very traumatic for them, and then having to unravel that piece with coming back to North America and going into counseling, etc. And then there are other women that have come to me and said, I've been going to counseling and for years. One woman was in her 40s and hadn't had an orgasm or something, and then she went to Peru and had sexual relations with a curandero outside a ceremony. She said she consented, and she said that was, in 2 weeks, the most healing and disturbing, like extreme chaotic experience she's ever had. And now, a year later, she's like integrated and she feels good. She takes responsibility for her actions. You know, at first she blamed the ayahuasquero and was like, he's the devil. And, you know, that's when I started to support her. And then a year later, I don't know, there was a shift that happened. And she realizes that, yeah, it was unethical in one way for him to do that. And she took responsibility for saying yes. So there's a whole spectrum of experience. And I've learned to not judge and just listen and support in whatever way I can, basically.
Another question?
Hi. Yeah, this may connect to that last question some, but you had mentioned the initiation that we all are brought into in the social forum wherever we happen to live, and here in the West, we associate the behavior of spiritual people to be chaste, and that is something that comes from the Catholic Church and their prohibition on sex by their religious leaders, and so we kind of assume that, but then in Hindu traditions and other traditions, that expectation does not necessarily exist. In your experience, what is the history in the jungle with their expectations within their culture before it became a tourist form or a cultured form across boundaries?
In terms of sexual initiations? Or how they view sexuality?
Well, no, thinking specifically about whether chastity is a fundamental part of it. Would they assume that necessarily? And, you know, as we get to know their spiritual tradition, what could we learn about what their expectations are, and how might we learn from that?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we found in the West, obviously, that when you repress like that, your spiritual leaders tend to take advantage of it when there's secrecy.
Yes, that's a great question. And when I've spoken with the locals near the Iquitos area around sexuality and the women curanderas, it's actually my total judgment on this as a Westerner, but that their way of engaging in sexuality and sexual initiations is actually not really mature, not developed. There's a lot of infidelity. The women, the Peruvian women, know that these men in ceremony will try something, so they go in knowing, and they think it's actually interesting that Western women go in naively thinking that these men in power are just going to help them because they have great hearts. No, they go in knowing that, yeah, it's an issue. And actually, in Peru, the majority of people who are spiritual seekers do not want to drink ayahuasca. So this is a whole other area. It's like our Western culture desiring something and drinking ayahuasca, which is, this is a new situation that we're all immersed in right now. So, thank you.
All right, one more question over here. I'm going to go over to the other side. Hold on.
So the question is, when in ceremony, the use of hands-on or spitting on a naked body is part of the ceremony. If that's understood, if somebody misinterprets that, how is that, I guess, how would you discuss the different things that go on ceremony that people might not understand as part of the culture, but could be misinterpreted?
So that's a good question too. This is where gathering information and speaking with people here in your community and local healers as well who know something about it. But I think there's a difference between, you're talking about sexual cultural perceptions and perspectives. That can be infused in the ceremony space. But I think it's more the individual ayahuasqueros that would, determine themselves what they want to feel in the person, and often it's in the form of they're trying to heal through hands-on, Reiki or something, and that could be interpreted as sometimes as healing. Like some healers do that, but I think this is a new thing that's happening, where you have these Western women going in and sort of giving themselves totally and trusting the healer, and they're actually shocked as well that this is happening, that they're just like laying before them. And so it's the woman, the plant drinker's responsibility to educate themselves. And I'm telling everyone that I speak with that hands-on is not essential for healing. It's through the song, it's that the ikaros, that's the the traditional form of healing, and that can take care of everything. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Another question? Miss, just a second. Excuse me.
For somebody who's curious about participating in a ceremony, like what would you recommend for finding a safe place? Or is it just like networking and getting recommendations from people, or would you say, is it more just like you still have to kind of be like careful even then, like even if someone says like, oh yeah, I've been here and it's like safe, you like, I don't know, do you have any like tips, I guess?
Yes, I would say go to my website, and I'm starting to compile resources that I feel good about. I can say that in a PC kind of way, right? And I'm also listing like websites that have blogs, and people share information and they discuss, I just went down to, Temple of the Way of Light, and this is what happened. So there are a lot of ways to access that information.
Next question.
Can you talk a little bit about journeyers who engage the sexual energy with others before the dieta is over? Not necessarily between the shaman and the journeyer, but the rising of sexual energy, the prohibition against engaging in it, and the desire to relent and engage in it.
Yes, excellent question. Thank you, because that was a piece that I forgot. In terms of this is common, and the joke is that people will go and say, "Can I diet sex?" And what is it really around that taboo around not having sexual activity during these diets? And the Westerner wanting to stretch and explore, like myself, in some ways learn the hard way. What is this all about? There are many layers as to that restriction and why that's important. And from what I've heard and experienced, that when you engage sexually, when you're on a plant diet, it just skews the energy in your body. The plant energy is so subtle and so refined that when you have this energy inside you and you're sexually relating with another human, you're taking in their energy, and it just skews your whole pattern, your vibrational pattern kind of thing. Hard to explain, but and I'm curious too to hear more stories about this, because I don't know what's possible in terms of having this rise of sexual energy, and then, well, what do people do with it? So I'm on one-on-one situations and sessions working with that energy and learning how to direct it and what to do with it. All the Kundalini rising situations that I've heard about, people are feeling really off and not knowing how to gauge like all the fire in them. So having various practices that will help realign and ease their journey. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you. Please help me thank Yalila Esposito. What a nice job.